let's just start off. Why don't you, for those who may not know you, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so you basically want an oral resume, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so my name is Michael Sutton. I'm 55 years old. I was born and raised in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, called Revere, Massachusetts. My mother is an Italian, a white Italian woman. My dad was African American. They were married back in 1965. And so, I grew up in a predominant, even though I have a white side of my family and a African American side or a black side of my family, I grew up predominantly in a white neighborhood. So I went to grade school, went to high school, all in, the white areas of the city of Revere. Um, and so then I graduated high school, went on to college in Boston, Massachusetts, where I received a associate degree in mechanical design technology. Then I joined the Army, the Military Police Corps, where I was actually sent to Honolulu, Hawaii, for my term of service, where I met my wife, a Filipino woman, Valerie. We've been married for 33 years. I have two children, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, both girls.
Mm.
And I currently work as a police officer in Austin, Texas, where I've been a detective for the last 6 years.
Amazing. All right. So ever since George Floyd was killed a few months ago, our country has been talking a lot about racism. Now, obviously, that conversation didn't begin this summer, and it will continue in the future. But this has especially started a conversation in churches about racism. But before we started recording, you wanted to share a little bit about even the definition of racism from your experience. Can you share with us your thoughts on that term?
Sure. So I think the term racism is a very strong and particular term. And I think that means where a person perceives or believes that his or her ethnicity is better than another person, and they could actually like lord it over them. So they believe that they are, how should I put this, um, better in that they can dominate others because of their ethnicity.
Okay.
But I think in our current society, and that's thrown around so often, I think it loses its true definition, which is that you believe because of your race, you can dominate and lord it over other people. And I think our political leaders, have thrown some kind of a fire or gas on that term racism. But what I think we have in our country is more of a bigotry or a prejudice toward others that don't look like you. And that means, in my opinion, because you don't look like me or look like a person that looks like me, your opinions of me are false, right? That you believe that, not that you can dominate me, but you just don't know, or your preconceived notions of me, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
are false. So you're maybe a bigot or prejudice. And I think that's just based on ignorance. Okay. Again, my opinion is based on ignorance. So I think that's what we have in our country more so than racism. So that's
All
my
right.
opinion.
Yeah, that's helpful. So, a lot of us have been kind of soul searching about racism, just because, like any sin, sometimes you're not aware of it. People can have problems that they aren't really aware of, and so I know for myself, and I know for many white Christians, we've kind of been soul searching. Is this? We need to learn more about this topic. We need to reflect on it in our own lives. Now, I don't think I've ever experienced any kind of discrimination because of the color of my skin. That's never happened to me. I wanted to ask you, have you ever experienced that? And if so, kind of, can you think of major examples? And if not, uh, can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I can give you a few examples, maybe growing up. Again, I believe this is more bigotry and prejudice versus
Okay.
racism.
Okay.
So again, like I said, I grew up in a predominant, white neighborhood. And so a couple of girlfriends that I've had that were white, I think I was about 15 or 14 years old. And we actually started dating for a couple of days. I mean, well, I'm in the ninth grade, the eighth grade. And I spoke to that person's mother, and she said, and I quote, you can't date my daughter because you're black. Right.
Wow.
And again, I'm not, I'm in the ninth grade, and I said, okay, well, I guess I can't date her daughter. But of course, her daughter didn't feel that way. Otherwise, she wouldn't date me for the past couple of days. So that was one example. And then actually, as I got older, I was about 18 years old, and I had another girlfriend for several months, whose mother that I knew. I think I was 18 and she was 19 years old. And for the first time after 2 months, I met her father. And then I left. I think I went on a high school trip. I got back and I got a phone call from her, and she told me, Michael, my dad said I cannot date you anymore because you're black. And I said, well, your mother doesn't feel that way, and I know you don't feel that way. Why does your dad feel that way? And she really didn't know. And she said, as long as I live under his roof, I have to abide by his rules. And thereby we broke up.
Wow.
And so those are two examples, I guess, growing up. But also, oddly enough, when I was in the Army, I was a military police officer, and I was roommate with a friend of mine. He was from Wisconsin, Greg, really nice fellow. I mean, we died for each other being in the military. And he said to me out of the clear blue, he says, Michael, don't get offended. I said, well, okay, well, I think I'm going to get offended. He said that. He says, you and I are good friends. I like you. But if I have a daughter and she marries a black person, I would disown her. I'm like, well, that is pretty racist remark. But
Yeah.
yet, he said, well, I like you and you're my friend. So take that for what it's worth. Take
Yeah.
that for worth. And so I guess one other example I can give, actually going through seminary, several years ago, I was graduating with my master's degree in theological studies, and another fellow seminarian graduating, and he says, Michael, how can I put this? He says, you know what? You're not as stupid, if you will, as I thought black people were. And this is going
Wow.
through seminary. And I was kind of surprised. He goes, but you know what? I think you're pretty smart. Again, is that racism? Is that bigotry? Is that prejudice? Those are some of the examples that I've experienced.
Yeah.
Again, for me, those are few and far between, but they do occur. And I think it's just based
Yeah.
on the other person's ignorance and perception as well. But I think once that person is educated, they may think differently.
Yeah. So one thing you've already mentioned is, you were in the military, and now you've been serving in the Austin Police Department, and you've now been a detective for the past 6 years. How has being a police officer impacted your view of the kind of current discussion about racism in our country?
Well, being a police officer, in the unrest that's happening for the past several months, the social unrest, has impacted me more as a police officer than as an African American or Black person.
Okay.
Because I think, so we have protesters and rioters. There's a big difference between a protester and a rioter, but I've been assigned to protest detail, and I have a white 20-something female college student calling me, an African-American police officer, a racist, just because of the uniform that I wear. Now, where does that come from? I'm a black person. She's white, calling me a racist because I'm a police officer. And unfortunately, it's really tough to dialogue with those people because they're angry, they're frustrated, and they project that anger on law enforcement. And police officers, are men and women, husband and fathers, mothers and daughters, right? Parents who want to make their society a better place to live. They're like you and me. They're people, the human beings that want to try to make this country a better place to live in. And so, that kind of frustrates me because they come again from a standpoint of ignorance, and these protesters or these rioters, injure police officers, cause criminal mischief and cause damage, and saying that their cause is nonviolent when I see firsthand that it's not. And I'm all for a peaceful protest, but these people, are not peaceful. They're rioters. And so it has affected me, again, more so as a police officer. And they want to do things that they don't understand, like they want to defund the police. They want to limit justifiable use of force because they think that every police officer, is a racist. Every police officer is a bad guy, when that's definitely not true. Do we have police officers who are bad and who do the wrong thing? Yes. But we prosecute them and do the best we can to weed them out of our department. So again, in my opinion, our country, the United States, we don't live in a country that has systematic racism, nor do we live in a society in our police departments that we have systematic racism. Does it exist? Yes, but in my opinion, it's not systematic. I worked in 2 police departments here in Austin and then in Honolulu, Hawaii, as well as for the federal government. And I can tell you from my experience, I didn't work with any racist police officers for the past 20 years. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't worked with them, or have I seen them in my experience.
That's really helpful. Thanks for your perspective. One other question I wanted to be sure to ask is, this is an adult Bible class for a church. And sometimes Christians have been some of the worst perpetrators of racism. If you go back in our history and you kind of see what they protested against, sometimes they protested against Black neighbors or Black kids going to the same schools as their white kids. So have you witnessed prejudice or discrimination in the church? You don't have to name a specific church, but have you ever experienced that? And if so, what do you hope for improvements kind of in this area in the church?
That's a good question. And again, I'd like to share with you my experiences and my background. See, I grew up, in the Catholic religion. And when I was about 18 years old, became a member of the Church of Christ. And it was totally inclusive. When I first became a Christian, we had African Americans, Hispanics, white people, all joining together in the service, singing songs, praying all together. And then I came to Hawaii. Again, it was a military church, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, totally inclusive. The same of which I experienced here in Austin, Texas. So I don't have any experience to share with you regarding exclusiveness or non-inclusiveness of the church. So that question, I just can't share my experiences. I was always included, in the churches that I have attended without exception. So,
well, that's great news. You don't have to manufacture something that you haven't
right.
experienced.
Exactly.
Let me ask this. We know from Scripture that one day in heaven there's going to be people from all tribes, all nations, all tongues. We know that that's what God wants. But when we look at our churches, especially in the U.S., they can be ethnically divided. you can kind of go into a predominantly white church or go into a predominantly Black church or predominantly Asian American church. What do you hope for, or what potential do you see in those churches coming together and actually being in the same churches together?
I think I see great potential, but I see the willingness on the African American churches, the predominantly Caucasian or white churches, the eight churches, to come together. Perhaps the leadership could come together and have monthly, you know, um, yearly, annually, meetings, just to come together to be diversified, so share with each other, different experiences that we have in the church. I mean, I think there's great potential for us to come together, and just experience another person's experience at their particular congregation. So I think there's great potential, but I think it begins with our leadership, perhaps with our elders, to make
Yeah.
an effort to reach out to those other churches, to come together. Perhaps, through Bible study, through worship, through song, through prayer,
Yeah.
in situations like that. Of course, I think there's great potential. But again, it takes the leadership, the eldership, the members to reach out to those other churches,
Yeah.
and like God said, to break down that wall of hostility between
Hmm.
the other ethnic groups.
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, so I never really attended a totally African American churches. I visited several of them, but never attended or was a member of just an African American only church.
Yeah.
Again, the churches I attended were mostly predominantly, white churches.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. These kinds of interviews are just so helpful to see the full range of experiences. I want to be sure to include as many possible perspectives. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with those watching? I want to be sure that you have a chance to share your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps just a couple of things, but I want to say to all Christians is that, don't be ashamed or guilty that God has created you to be you, with all your gifts, with all your talents, and with all your flaws. All right, God created you to do good works and to represent Him, through Jesus Christ, and to respect other people and treat them with dignity, as well. And like God, show no respect to persons, but keep that golden rule, right, to your heart. Treat other people like you want to be treated. And I think if we do that, we can make this world, our society, a better place, right?
Yeah.
And finally, for the African Americans, for the Black folks out there, and again, I think studies have shown that, is there racism in this country? Yes, but I don't believe that it is systematic. Again, nor in our departments, our churches, in our country, in our police departments. But people of color have tremendous and marvelous opportunities to exceed, unlike never before. And we should take advantage of those opportunities, not play the role of victim, but in all things, let God be glorified and take advantages of the gifts that God has given you in this country. If we do that, again, we can make the world, this country, in a better place to live for all people.
Well, thanks for making some time for me. I know you're a busy guy, lots going on, and so I appreciate it so much. Um, I just know that I really believe that God is going to work through this whole series to help people address this issue and help our churches be more unified, more diverse, and give our spiritual gifts for the sake of the common good. So thanks so much for making time for me. I really think this will be a blessing.
Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.